Hey, so I'm back with another video. Surprise, surprise. This one I'm going to mark as optional because this is going to go into something we haven't talked about, which is how things are stored in memory in Python. So if you're intimidated already by this section, I don't want to lose you here. So come back to this later. It's kind of skipping ahead a little bit. So we talked about double equals already to test for equality, but there's another way to test for equality that you'll see, which is is. And so I know it's kind of confusing. What's the difference between is and equals if they both are testing for equality? And yeah, I have a really dumb quote about it depends on what the meaning of the word is. I don't know what I was thinking when I put that there. But essentially, I mean, it does depend on the meaning of is in this case, and there is a different meaning than double equals. But first, let's see how they're similar. So we do something like this in Python. A equals 1. Then we say, okay, that variable a is 1. Does a equal 1? And that's true. Double equals, equality is true. Same thing for a is 1. That also returns true. So, okay, how are they different? Well, here's an example. Here's something we haven't really talked about, but you've seen lists very, very briefly. At least you've seen them if you've been watching all the videos and haven't been skipping around, which is totally fine if you do that. But this is a list, and they look the same to us as humans, right? The data inside is the same. We'll get to them in just a couple sections. So when we use double equals, it returns true because the value of the lists are the same. But when we do A is B, it returns false. And the difference is that double equals is checking the values to see if they're the same. A is B is checking to see if they're stored in the same place in memory. So with lists, they could look the same, but they're different instances. They're different objects. And we haven't really talked about objects. So this is sort of an awkward video for me to place in the course. But I want to put it here just because we're already talking about double equals. But I also will reference it once we talk more about lists and objects. But the key thing is comparing the values, which is a lot of the time what you actually want to do for lists and things to see if they look the same, hold the same data, we use double equals. But if you want to see if it's exactly the same place in memory, you use is. So here's another example. If we then take this list, B, and I make a new variable called C, and I say C is equal to B, they're now pointing to the same list in memory. So B is C is true. It sounds like kind of like a tongue twister. Well, I guess that'd be too easy for a tongue twister, but it sounds like gibberish. But the key thing, again, double equals checks values. This is checks memory. So here's, is only truthy if the variables reference the same item in memory. So if you care, I will quickly demonstrate that. So I'll make a variable called x, and I will set that to 13. And then I'll make another variable called y and set that to 13. So if we do x equals y, that returns true because they're pointing to the same place in memory. And if I do x is y, and that also returns true because every time we reference the number 13, it's not a new object that's created in memory. And again, we haven't talked about objects, so bear with me here. But what I really want to talk about is if we do something like this. Let's, instead of x and y, let's do a and b. So a is a list just containing the numbers 1 and 2. And b is another list containing 1 and 2, which we also haven't talked about lists, so bear with me again. If we do a equals b, that's true. It contains the same values. They look the same. Now, the order does matter. We haven't talked about that, but really, let's just say they look the same, so they are the same value. But if I do A is B, it's not true because this is a separate object in memory. Every time these brackets are here, a new list is created in memory. And they're pointing to, A is pointing to this one, B is pointing to this one. They look the same. They're holding the same data, but they're unique in our computer's memory. So A is not the same as B. But if I make a variable called clone, and I set that equal to A, clone now holds, it's pointing to the same part of memory as A. So there's kind of two arrows pointing to this. We've got A pointing to that and clone. So if I do A is clone, we get true. So most of the time we'll be using double equals to check for equal values, but it will come up later where we care that we're checking for equality of objects, like the exact same object in memory, rather than just their value. Okay, so that's the difference between is and equals.